A freezing night under a flickering streetlight. A homeless veteran, Ethan Cole, shivers beneath a tattered blanket, clutching a faded photo of a boy he has not seen in 20 years. Suddenly, he hears a car crash echo through the empty street. Without hesitation, Ethan throws off his blanket and rushes toward the wreck. Flames lick the metal. Inside, a young man fights for breath. Ethan smashes the window, dragging the man to safety, only to later discover a familiar locket around his neck. The very same one Ethan gave his son before he left for war. The man he saved is his son. The city slept under a cold, merciless wind. Streetlights flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. In a dark alley behind a rusted dumpster and a pile of damp cardboard, a man stirred beneath a worn army coat. His name was Ethan Cole, a name once respected, once saluted, once written on medals, now pawned for food. Tonight, like every night, he lay with one arm curled around a small bundle wrapped in a tattered cloth. Inside it was his entire world, an old photograph. In it, a young woman smiled radiantly beside a 5-year-old boy whose blue eyes sparkled with trust and love. The man in the picture stood proudly in uniform, his hands resting protectively on their shoulders. That man no longer existed. Ethan blinked against the biting wind and sat up slowly, his joints aching. Around him, the faint hum of the city continued, cars passing, people laughing somewhere far away, music from a bar echoing down the street. All sounds of a life that had moved on without him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a dented metal flask. Empty. He sighed, rubbing his unshaven face. "Guess that's for the best," he muttered. His voice was low, gravelly, as if the years had scraped it clean of warmth. Across the street, the neon sign of a diner buzzed faintly. Ethan watched people come and go, clutching hot coffee, wearing clean coats. He did not resent them, at least not anymore. Life had taught him that resentment was a weight no man could carry forever. He rose to his feet, wrapped his coat tighter, and started walking. He reached the veterans' shelter just before dawn. The staff there knew him. Sergeant Cole. They sometimes called him with respectful smiles, though he never corrected them when they got the rank wrong. He wasn't there for charity, not anymore. He came to help. "Morning, Ethan," said Martha, the shelter supervisor, handing him a cup of hot soup. "Cold one today." "Feels like the war's back," he said, forcing a small smile. Martha chuckled softly. "Still helping with the supply crates later? Wouldn't miss it." The shelter was one of the few places where Ethan felt human again. He fixed broken chairs, repaired leaking pipes, and sometimes gave quiet talks to younger veterans who had just returned from service. They looked at him with respect, unaware that he once had a family he lost through his own weakness. One afternoon, as he was repairing a heater, a new arrival stumbled into the shelter. A young veteran named Derek, barely in his 20s, his hands shaking. Ethan noticed him sitting alone at a corner table, staring blankly at the wall. He sat down across from him. "First time here?" Ethan asked gently. Derek nodded, eyes hollow. "Yeah, I can't sleep. Can't stop hearing things." Ethan nodded knowingly. "The quiet's the worst, isn't it?" The young man's lip trembled. "I thought I was strong, but now every time I close my eyes, I see their faces." Ethan put a hand on his shoulder. "You are strong. Strong doesn't mean you don't break. It means you keep standing after you do." For a moment, Derek's eyes softened. "You talk like you've been there." Ethan smiled sadly. "I have," he didn't say more. Some things didn't need words. Later that night, as the shelter closed, Ethan sat outside by the curb, watching snowflakes drift down from the dark sky. His mind wandered to the past, to Grace, the woman he once called his wife. She had been everything he wasn't: gentle, patient, full of light. She had waited for him through deployments, through long silences and broken promises. But when he came home, he wasn't the same man. The nightmares, the anger, the guilt, they ate away at him until even Grace couldn't reach him anymore. He remembered the last night they spoke. "Ethan," she had said softly, standing in the doorway, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Lucas is scared of you." He had turned away, gripping the edge of the table. "He shouldn't be. I'd never hurt him." "I know," she whispered, "but he doesn't. And neither do you, not anymore." He looked at her then, realizing what she meant, that she was leaving, that she couldn't watch him drown anymore. "I just need time," he'd pleaded. "You've had time," she said. "You need help." When he woke the next morning, they were gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the photo left on the counter. He had searched for them, called old friends, even visited her parents' home, but she had vanished completely. Eventually, he stopped trying. The years blurred. And by the time he was ready to be the man they deserved, he had lost everything. Now sitting on the frozen pavement, Ethan stared at that same photograph, the edges worn smooth by time. "Lucas," he whispered, his breath clouding in the air, "if you're still out there, I hope you grew up to be better than me." His voice cracked. He closed his eyes, fighting back tears he hadn't allowed in years. Hours later, near midnight, Ethan heard a muffled cry from the other end of the alley. He stood cautious. A woman was cornered by two men, their voices slurred with alcohol. "Please leave me alone," she shouted, clutching her purse. Ethan moved instinctively. "Hey!" he barked, his voice carrying the authority of the soldier he once was. "Back off." The men turned, sneering. "What's it to you, old man?" Ethan took a step forward. "You don't want to find out." They laughed, until they saw the look in his eyes. That steely, unblinking calm that only men who've seen war possess. The laughter faded. One muttered something under his breath and backed away, dragging the other with him. The woman stood trembling. Thank you," she stammered. Ethan nodded. "You should call someone to walk you home next time." "Wait," she said as he turned to leave. "At least tell me your name." He paused. "Just Ethan," she smiled faintly. "You're a good man, Ethan." He didn't answer. He simply walked back into the shadows, the city's noise swallowing him whole. Later, as he sat beneath the bridge where he slept, Ethan stared at the sky. The stars were faint above the city haze, but one shone brighter than the rest. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Grace, wherever you are, I'm sorry." His fingers tightened around the photograph. Tomorrow would be another cold morning. Another day of searching for meaning in a world that had forgotten him. But what Ethan didn't know was that fate was moving silently, weaving its threads through time and chance. In just a few days, the same hands that trembled with regret would pull a dying man from a burning car. And in that single act of courage, his life and his past would collide in ways he could never imagine. The night was bitterly cold. A sharp wind swept through the underpass, carrying with it the smell of rain and gasoline. Ethan huddled beneath an old tarp, his army coat drawn tight around him. The city above hummed with life, cars rushing past, lights glowing through mist, but down here time moved slower, quieter. He had grown used to the rhythm of loneliness. There was a strange peace in it. No expectations, no disappointments, no one left to lose. He was drifting between sleep and wakefulness when the sound shattered the stillness. A screech of tires. A crash of metal. Then, a deafening explosion of glass and fire. Ethan bolted upright. Smoke filled the air, curling through the streetlights like dark ghosts. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and sprinted toward the sound. His boots splashed through puddles, his breath ragged in the freezing air. At the intersection ahead, a silver car lay crumpled against a lamppost. The hood was smoking, one door jammed, the other twisted open. Flames flickered beneath the engine. Ethan's instincts took over. The soldier in him, the one he thought was long gone, came roaring back to life. "Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted, approaching the wreck. Inside, through the cracked windshield, he saw a young man slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his temple. The airbag had deployed, smoke billowing around him. Ethan yanked on the driver's side door. It wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, gritting his teeth, but the metal was warped. Flames licked closer to the fuel line. Come on," he muttered, glancing around desperately. He spotted a metal rod near the curb, a broken signpost. Snatching it up, he jammed it between the frame and door, using every ounce of strength left in his weary body. The door finally gave way with a shriek. He reached in, unbuckling the seatbelt, careful not to worsen the man's wounds. The young man moaned weakly. "Hang on, kid," Ethan said, pulling him out as the heat grew unbearable. "You're not dying tonight." They stumbled back just as the car burst into flames. The explosion lit up the street, showering sparks across the wet pavement. Ethan shielded the man with his body, feeling the heat sear against his coat. When the fire died down to a roaring blaze, Ethan lowered the man gently onto the ground. "Stay with me," he urged. The young man's eyelids fluttered. Where am I?" "Safe," Ethan said, checking his pulse. "You're going to be all right." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called for help. Ethan pulled off his scarf and pressed it against the gash on the man's forehead. The young man tried to speak again, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." "Don't waste your breath," Ethan murmured. "Save your strength." Within minutes, paramedics arrived, pushing Ethan gently aside as they began their work. They loaded the injured man onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. One of the medics turned to Ethan. "Did you pull him out?" Ethan nodded. "You probably saved his life," she said. "If you hadn't gotten him out before that explosion." Ethan just shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Most people would have run the other way. The next morning, Ethan sat on a park bench, staring blankly at his blistered hands. His coat was singed, his palms scraped and bruised. He hadn't slept, he didn't even know the man's name. He told himself it didn't matter. The paramedics had taken over, and that was enough. Still, something inside him wouldn't rest. There was a strange pull in his chest, an unease he couldn't explain. Finally, he decided to go to the hospital. At St. Joseph's Medical Center, Ethan hesitated at the entrance. The clean, bright lobby felt foreign after years on the streets. He could feel people's eyes on him. The security guard's suspicious glance, the receptionist's polite discomfort. He stepped forward anyway. "I'm looking for a young man. Car accident last night on 5th and Main. I pulled him out." The nurse behind the counter looked up. "Are you family?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just someone who was there." "I'm sorry, sir, we can't share details unless you're next of kin." He nodded quietly, accepting it. "Can you at least tell me if he's alive?" She hesitated, then softened. "He's stable. In recovery." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, a voice called out, "Wait, are you the man who saved him?" Ethan looked back. A middle-aged woman in a business suit approached. "Dr. Morgan," her badge read. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied. She smiled warmly. "The young man's name is Ryan. He was asking about you when he woke up." "He wants to meet his rescuer." Ethan froze. "He's awake?" "He is. A little disoriented, but alive thanks to you. If you'd like, I can take you to his room." He hesitated. A wave of discomfort hit him. His dirty clothes, his smell, the way people in the lobby had stared. "I don't want to disturb him," Ethan said quietly. "I think you'd be doing him a favor," the doctor insisted kindly. "He's been asking to thank you." After a moment, Ethan nodded. "All right." The room was quiet except for the steady beep of a heart monitor. The young man lay propped up against white pillows, his head bandaged, his arm in a sling. His eyes flicked toward the door when Ethan stepped in. "Hey," Ryan said weakly, managing a smile. "You're the guy, right? The one who pulled me out?" Ethan nodded, standing awkwardly near the door. "Yeah, guess I was in the right place at the right time." Ryan laughed softly. "Right place, wrong time for me, huh?" Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Could have been worse." "Sit," Ryan said, gesturing to the chair beside the bed. "Please." Ethan hesitated, then sat down. Ryan studied him curiously. "You're a vet, aren't you?" Ethan blinked. "How'd you guess?" "The way you moved when you came in. Careful, like you're still in the field." Ethan gave a small shrug. "Old habits," Ryan smiled faintly. "My mother used to say that about my dad. He was in the army too. Never really came back from it." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a flash of recognition quickly hidden. "Is he still around?" he asked. Ryan's expression darkened. "No, he died when I was a kid. Or at least that's what Mom told me." Ethan's hands clenched around his knees. "I'm sorry," Ryan nodded. "It's all right. She did her best raising me alone." Ethan studied the young man, the sharp jawline, the determined gaze, the faint scar on his left eyebrow. Something about him felt familiar, but he brushed it aside. "I should let you rest," Ethan said, standing. "Wait," Ryan said quickly. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Cole." Ryan repeated the name quietly. "Thank you, Ethan, for saving my life." Ethan smiled faintly. "Just be careful next time. Not everyone gets a second chance." As he turned to leave, Ryan called out again. "I'd like to see you when I'm out of here. Buy you a meal. You saved me. I owe you that much." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "We'll see." He walked out of the hospital into the crisp evening air, unaware that the young man lying in that bed was not just a stranger he had rescued, he had just saved his own son. A week passed since the accident. The city had begun to thaw from winter's grasp, yet Ethan still felt the cold deep in his bones. Every morning he returned to the shelter to help distribute food and repair what little could be fixed. But lately his thoughts wandered to the young man he had pulled from the wreck. Ryan. There was something about him. His voice, his mannerisms, even the quiet determination in his eyes that refused to leave Ethan's mind. The connection felt strange, like a half-remembered dream hovering just out of reach. 3 days later, as Ethan was mopping the shelter floor, Martha came in holding a paper bag. "Delivery for you," she said with a teasing smile. "From a Ryan Matthews." Ethan frowned. "Ryan?" She nodded. "He dropped by this morning. Said you might not come see him, so he'd come to you." Inside the bag were fresh clothes, a hot meal, and a handwritten note. "You saved my life. That means I owe you one. Lunch tomorrow? Please say yes." Ryan. Ethan stared at the letter for a long moment before folding it carefully and slipping it into his pocket. The next day, he found himself sitting across from Ryan at a small diner downtown. It felt strange being there, clean-shaven, wearing clothes that didn't smell of smoke or street air. Ryan had insisted on it, even leaving a cab waiting for him outside the shelter. "You look good," Ryan said warmly. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Ethan gave a shy smile. "I don't usually eat in places like this. Then today's an exception." Ryan handed him a menu. "My treat." They ordered coffee and sandwiches. For a while, the conversation was light. Weather, sports, the city's constant noise. But beneath it all, there was a quiet curiosity between them. "So," Ryan said, leaning back, "tell me about you, Ethan Cole. You said you were a vet, right?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, served 15 years. Afghanistan mostly." Ryan whistled. That's a lifetime of service." "Sometimes feels like several," Ethan murmured, staring into his coffee. Ryan hesitated. "Do you still have family around?" The question hung heavy in the air. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I had a wife once," he said finally. "Grace. She was the best part of me. And a boy, Lucas, smart kid. Loved airplanes." Ryan leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Ethan's voice grew softer. "War happened. I came back a different man. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Pushed them away until one day. They were gone." "I'm sorry," Ryan said quietly. Ethan nodded, forcing a small smile. "You don't need to be. It was my fault. Every bit of it." For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Ryan spoke, his tone almost hesitant. "My mom's name was Grace," he said. "Grace Matthews." Ethan looked up sharply. "Grace?" Ryan nodded. "Yeah, she passed a few years ago. She never talked much about my dad, though. Said he was a soldier. Died before I was old enough to remember him." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "What did you say your mother's name was?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "Grace Matthews," Ryan repeated. "Why?" Ethan's hands began to shake. "Did she ever mention his name?" Ryan frowned, thinking. "Once, I was maybe 10. She was crying, holding this old photo of a man in uniform. She said his name was Ethan Cole. Why?" Ethan's world seemed to collapse inward. The room blurred, the air growing thin. He reached into his coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the worn photograph he always carried. He placed it on the table. Ryan's breath caught. His eyes widened as he stared at the image, the same one his mother used to hold. A smiling woman, a little boy, and the man sitting right in front of him, younger but unmistakable. "That's," Ryan whispered. "That's her. That's my mom." His voice cracked. "And that's me." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "And that," he whispered, "is me." The diner seemed to fade away. Only silence remained, the kind that stretches across years of loss and disbelief. Ryan's hand trembled as he touched the photo. "This can't be real." Ethan swallowed hard. "It is. I thought I'd lost you both forever. Your mother left to protect you. I gave her reason to." Ryan shook his head, his eyes glistening. "She said you were gone, that you died overseas." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I might as well have. I wasn't the man she married. I let the war turn me into something she couldn't bear to watch. When she left, I thought she'd found someone better, someone safer. She never remarried," Ryan said quietly. "She kept your photo by her bed until the day she died." Ethan's lips quivered. "I don't deserve that." Ryan stared at him, struggling to breathe. The realization crashed over him in waves. The man who saved him from the burning car, the homeless veteran he had admired, was his father. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on them. Finally, Ryan whispered, "All these years, I thought I'd never know who you were." Ethan wiped his eyes. "If I could change anything, I would. I'd have been there for you, for her. But I can't fix the past, son." Ryan's voice cracked at the word son. "You don't have to. You're here now." Ethan looked up, tears streaking his weathered face. "You still want me here?" Ryan leaned forward, gripping his father's hands. "You saved my life, Dad. I think that means you were meant to be here." Ethan broke down then, shoulders shaking as he wept openly in the middle of the diner. Ryan stood and wrapped his arms around him, holding tight. 2 men, strangers for decades, bound again by blood, hate, and forgiveness. People watched from nearby tables, but neither of them cared. When they finally parted, Ethan looked at Ryan through red-rimmed eyes. "You have her eyes, you know," he said softly. Ryan smiled faintly. "She used to say I had yours." Ethan laughed weakly, a sound half joy, half sorrow. "Guess she was right." That night, Ryan insisted on driving Ethan back to the small apartment he now lived in. Along the way, they talked for hours. About Grace, about Lucas's childhood, about the years Ethan had spent lost and broken. Ryan listened quietly, sometimes wiping his eyes. When they reached the corner of the street, he turned to his father. "Don't go back to the shelter tonight," he said. "Come stay with me, please." Ethan shook his head gently. "I can't, son. I'm not ready for that. But I'll visit. I promise," Ryan nodded reluctantly. "Then at least promise me you'll take this." He reached into his jacket and handed Ethan a small silver locket. Ethan's breath caught as he recognized it instantly. The locket he had given Grace the day he left for war, engraved with the words, "For all the tomorrows we'll share." She wore it every day. Ryan said softly, "I want you to have it now." Ethan closed his fingers around the locket, tears welling again. "Thank you, son." "Don't thank me," Ryan whispered. "Just don't disappear again." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Never again." As Ryan drove away, Ethan stood beneath the flickering streetlight, clutching the locket against his chest. For the first time in 20 years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever: peace. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Grace." He found me, and somewhere beyond the clouds, in the stillness of the night, it felt as though she was smiling back. The following weeks passed like a slow dawn after a long, dark night. For years, Ethan had lived in the shadows, his world limited to the corners of alleys and forgotten benches. But now, sunlight began to creep back into his life. Each morning, he would walk to the small cafe where Ryan worked remotely, and the two would share breakfast before Ryan drove him to the Veterans Center for volunteer work. At first, their conversations were cautious, gentle steps around old wounds. But as days turned into weeks, the walls between them began to crumble. One chilly morning, Ryan brought Ethan a set of neatly folded clothes. "Try these," he said with a grin. "You can't keep wearing that coat forever." Ethan chuckled softly. "That coat's seen more than most men." "Exactly," Ryan replied. "Time to retire it." Ethan tried on the clothes: simple jeans, a flannel shirt, and a warm jacket. He hardly recognized the man in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him looked older, yes, but also alive. "You look good, Dad," Ryan said sincerely. Ethan paused at the word Dad. It still felt strange, like hearing a melody he once loved but thought he'd forgotten. "Thank you, son," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "It's been a long time since anyone said that to me." As the days passed, Ryan began learning more about his father's past, stories Ethan had never shared with anyone. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset, Ryan asked softly, "Was it really that hard, coming home after the war?" Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "It was worse than the war itself. Over there, at least you knew who the enemy was. Back home, the enemy was inside me." Ryan listened silently. "I came back with nightmares that wouldn't end. Ethan continued. The noise, the faces, the guilt of who I couldn't save, it all followed me. I thought I could drink it away, yell it away, but I only drove away the people I loved. Ryan reached over and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. Ethan looked at him, eyes glistening. You sound just like your mother. Ryan smiled faintly. Then I'm proud too. A few days later, Ryan invited Ethan to his apartment for dinner. It was the first time Ethan had stepped into a real home in years. The walls were lined with books and photos, pictures of Ryan with friends, co-workers, and one of Grace smiling brightly. Ethan stopped in front of it, his breath catching. She never changed, he whispered. Ryan nodded. She talked about you sometimes, mostly when she thought I wasn't listening. She said she wished you could have met the man I'd become. Ethan swallowed hard. I wish I had too. They sat at the table, sharing a simple meal, steak, mashed potatoes, and 2 glasses of water. Yet for Ethan, it felt like a feast. Every bite tasted of memory and healing. Halfway through dinner, Ryan spoke up. There's something I've been thinking about. What's that? Ethan asked. I want to start something. A foundation for homeless veterans. For men like you. No one should have to live like that after serving their country. Ethan looked at him in disbelief. You'd do that? Ryan smiled. You gave me my life back, literally. The least I can do is give something back to others like you. Ethan's voice wavered. You're a better man than I ever was. Ryan shook his head. I learned compassion from the man who ran into a burning car to save a stranger. Ethan chuckled softly, tears threatening to spill. Guess that counts for something. As the weeks went on, their bond deepened. Ethan moved into a small rented room near the Veterans Center. Ryan helped him find steady work assisting with outreach programs, mentoring younger veterans battling trauma and addiction. For the first time in decades, Ethan had a reason to wake up with purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was rebuilding. One afternoon during a group therapy session, a young Marine broke down admitting he had lost his home and family due to his temper. Ethan walked over, placed a hand on the man's shoulder and said quietly, I know exactly how that feels. But believe me, no matter how far you fall, life always gives you one more chance to stand. Ryan, who had come to watch that day, felt tears sting his eyes. He realized his father had not just returned to him. He had found his calling again. But healing wasn't without pain. One evening, Ethan fell ill. The years of cold nights and malnutrition had taken a toll on his body. Ryan rushed him to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear. Dad, stay with me, Ryan pleaded as doctors moved him to a bed. Ethan tried to smile through his fatigue. Relax, soldier. I've survived worse. Ryan held his father's hand tightly. I can't lose you again. Not now. Ethan's voice grew faint. You won't, I promise. He drifted into sleep as Ryan sat beside him all night, gripping his hand, whispering stories about Grace, about the life she had dreamed of for all 3 of them. When Ethan woke the next morning, his son was still there, head resting on the edge of the bed, eyes weary but determined. You stayed, Ethan said softly. Of course I did, Ryan replied. Where else would I be? Ethan's voice broke. You really are my boy. Ryan smiled through tears. Always was. Weeks later, once Ethan had recovered, Ryan took him to a small ceremony. In front of a modest crowd of veterans and city officials, Ryan stepped onto the stage with a velvet box in his hand. He turned to his father. This man, he said, voice steady but emotional, taught me what true heroism means. Not through medals or battles, but through redemption, courage, and love. I present this to my father, Ethan Cole, the man who saved my life. Twice. He opened the box to reveal a shining medal engraved with the words, For my father, my hero. Ethan stood frozen, tears spilling down his cheeks. Ryan pinned the medal gently to his jacket, then embraced him as the crowd erupted into applause. In that moment, all the years of pain, loss, and regret melted away. Father and son, broken by fate but mended by love, stood together as the world finally saw the man Ethan truly was. That night, they visited Grace's grave together. The cemetery was quiet, bathed in soft moonlight. Ethan knelt before the headstone, tracing her name with trembling fingers. Grace Cole, he whispered. You were right to leave. I wasn't ready then, but I am now. He placed the locket she once wore beside the stone. "He found me, Grace. Our boy found me. And he's everything we ever dreamed he'd be." Ryan knelt beside him, resting a hand on his father's shoulder. "Mom would be proud," he said softly. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with both sorrow and peace. "Then I can finally rest easy." They stood there for a long time, the wind carrying the scent of rain and renewal. Above them, the stars broke through the clouds, casting a gentle glow over the gravesite like a silent blessing from the heavens. As they walked away, Ethan turned to his son with a faint smile. "Come on, Ryan," he said. "We've got work to do. Those veterans aren't going to save themselves." Ryan laughed. "You sound just like Mom." "Good," Ethan replied, eyes glinting with quiet pride. "Means I'm finally doing something right." For the first time in 20 years, Ethan Cole was not a forgotten soldier or a homeless man. He was a father, a hero, and a man finally at peace with his past. And as he walked beside his son under the pale morning light, it was clear their story was no longer about loss but about redemption, love, and the unbreakable bond of family reborn. Months passed, and life began to take on a rhythm neither Ethan nor Ryan had ever imagined possible. The days of sleeping under bridges and begging for change were long gone. Now Ethan awoke each morning to the soft hum of city life, the scent of coffee drifting from the small kitchen of his new apartment, a place he could finally call home. But more than walls and a roof, it was the sense of purpose that sustained him. Every morning, Ethan donned his simple uniform, a blue shirt with the emblem of the Cole Foundation for Veterans Hope, and headed to the outreach center with renewed energy. The foundation had started small, a single office, a handful of volunteers, and a dream. But within months, it had blossomed into a sanctuary for dozens of former soldiers trying to rebuild their lives. And at the heart of it all was Ethan. Ryan watched with quiet pride as his father spoke to new arrivals, men and women who wore the same haunted expressions he once had. Ethan never lectured them. He simply listened, offering empathy born from experience. One afternoon, a young veteran named Marcus broke down in front of him. "I don't have anyone left," Marcus sobbed. "My family's gone. My friends stopped calling. I'm nothing." Ethan knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the man's shoulder. "I thought the same once," he said softly. "But I learned something out here. Being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair. Every scar is proof that you've survived. And as long as you're breathing, son, you still have a chance to start again." Marcus wiped his tears. "You really believe that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I don't just believe it. I'm living proof of it." From that moment, Marcus began to heal, and Ethan realized that saving Ryan that night had not been fate's accident. It had been a call to purpose. The universe had given him one last mission: to save others like himself. One evening, Ryan stopped by the center after work. He found Ethan sitting alone in the main hall, surrounded by stacks of donation forms and volunteer rosters. The sunlight filtering through the window turned his father's gray hair to silver. "Working late again?" Ryan asked. Ethan looked up and smiled. "Old habits die hard," Ryan chuckled. "You've turned into quite the leader, Dad." "Leader?" Ethan shook his head. "Nah, I just help people find the light they lost. Same thing you did for me." Ryan's gaze softened. "You did the hard part. I just showed up." Ethan paused. "That's more than most ever did." For a moment, silence settled between them, comfortable, warm. Ryan looked around the hall, filled with photos of veterans who had found homes, jobs, and families again through their efforts. "You've built something incredible here," he said. Ethan exhaled deeply. "No, we did. This foundation isn't just for me, it's for your mother, too. She always wanted to help others. I think she'd be proud of us." Ryan smiled, his eyes glimmering. "I know she would." Weeks later, the foundation was invited to a local news feature highlighting community heroes. Ryan insisted Ethan attend, though the older man protested at first. "I don't do cameras," Ethan grumbled. "Never did," Ryan laughed. "This time it's not about war or loss. It's about hope. People need to see that." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. When the day arrived, the reporter asked him, "Mr. Cole, what inspired you to start this foundation after everything you've been through?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "There was a time I thought my life was over," he said slowly. I lost everything, my family, my home, my sense of worth. But then one night I saved a stranger, and that stranger turned out to be my son. That moment changed everything. It reminded me that even when life breaks you, love has a way of finding you again. This foundation is proof that no one is truly lost, not as long as someone cares enough to reach out a hand. The studio fell silent. Even the camera operator lowered his head for a moment. When the interview aired that night, Ethan's story spread across social media, inspiring thousands. Messages poured in from veterans, families, and even strangers thanking him for his courage. The once forgotten soldier had become a symbol of redemption. But despite the growing attention, Ethan remained humble. He still took the bus to work, shared lunch with the staff, and greeted every new face with the same gentle smile. Fame didn't interest him. Healing did. One chilly December morning, Ryan arrived at the center with a surprise. He led Ethan outside where a large white van waited, freshly painted with the foundation's logo. Ethan stared in disbelief. "What's this?" Ryan grinned. "Our new outreach van. We're taking the foundation mobile. We can reach veterans living on the streets, those who can't make it here." Ethan ran his fingers across the logo, his eyes welling with emotion. "You've thought of everything." Ryan shrugged. "Just following your example, old man." Ethan laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed through the courtyard. "You always did outdo me." Ryan put an arm around him. "Not outdo. Just continue what you started." That winter, they launched the Road to Redemption initiative, traveling city to city, handing out supplies, offering shelter referrals, and giving hope to those who'd given up. Every time Ethan spoke to another veteran, he saw a reflection of his younger self, tired, broken, but still fighting to live. One night, as they packed up after a long outreach event, Ryan turned to his father and asked quietly, "Do you ever think about that night, the one where we met again?" Ethan looked up at the stars. "Every day," he said. "I used to think it was chance, but now I know it was Grace's doing." Ryan smiled softly. "Mom?" Ethan nodded. "She always believed love finds a way. I guess she sent you back to me when I needed it most." They stood in silence, gazing at the sky, the cold wind brushing their faces. It felt as if somewhere among the stars, Grace was smiling down at them. Years later, on the 5th anniversary of the foundation, a crowd gathered in a park newly renamed Cole Veterans Plaza. A bronze statue stood at the center, depicting a soldier kneeling, not in defeat but in compassion, offering a helping hand to another. Ryan stepped up to the podium. "This statue," he said, "represents every veteran who fell but rose again. It represents every parent, every child, every bond that survived hardship. But most of all, it represents my father, a man who taught me that no one is ever truly forgotten." He turned to Ethan, sitting proudly in the front row, tears glimmering in his eyes. The crowd applauded and Ethan rose slowly, saluting in silent gratitude. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a lost soldier. He felt like a man who had finally come home. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ryan and Ethan sat quietly by the river, the same place where they had once shared stories of regret and forgiveness. "You know," Ethan said with a faint smile, "I used to think the world had moved on without me. Now I realize it was just waiting for me to wake up." Ryan chuckled softly. "You woke up just in time." Ethan looked at him with pride. "You gave me that chance, son. You gave me back my life." Ryan shook his head. "No, Dad, you saved mine first." They sat in silence, watching the water reflect the fading orange glow of sunset. Two men once broken by war and time, now whole again through love and redemption. And as night fell, Ethan closed his eyes, whispering a final prayer of gratitude to the woman who had tied their souls together even beyond death. In the gentle rustle of the trees, he could almost hear her voice. "You did it, Ethan. You found your way home." And for the first time in 20 years, Ethan truly believed it.